Hello, I'm Martin. This presentation has been prepared for the ASL 2020 virtual conference. Today I'm going to share with you my approach to reading one of Peter Carey's short stories. In the first instance, I'm going to treat the story as a searchable text. I'm going to feed the text into a program called a concordancer and run some searches. Then I'll discuss the findings. I hope that you find the presentation interesting, and I hope that it will inspire you to use a concordancer in your own research. I'm going to organise this presentation into four main parts. First, I'll give some background to the research, which is basically introducing the story. Then I'll demonstrate a keyword search and a Collocate search and discuss the findings. So, Do You Love Me was first published in 1975. It's one of my favourite Peter Carey stories. It's a very strange kind of world. It's a world in which cartographers are highly valued in society, and that's because they make reality. Every year, the cartographers release a report, and it's a big deal. If the report is good, there's social cohesion, and the people are happy for the year. But if the report is bad, there's a lot of social unrest. The main complication in the story is that despite there being a good cartographer's report, it's a social disaster because buildings and later people begin to disappear, to dematerialize without any explanation. Now, this story is narrated by an adolescent male who is at the age where he is finding his own independence from his father. The narrator's father is a cartographer, and he's not a very nice guy, but he has an interesting theory about why things are disappearing. As a cartographer, he's seen things that many average people haven't seen, and he argues that the reason why things are dematerializing, why they're disappearing, is because they're either irrelevant, or they're harmful, or they're not loved by people. Ironically, the narrator's father dematerializes at the end of the story, despite his insistence that cartographers such as himself are vitally important. With so much going on in the story, it's sometimes difficult to know where to start with one's interpretation. For me, my starting point was a keyword search. A keyword is a word that appears statistically more frequently in a text than in its normal usage. And thanks to digital technology, it's very easy to establish what the keywords in a text are. A keyword search requires two things before getting started. You can see on my computer desktop that I have a copy of Peter Carey's story in a .txt file. A concordancer can only read .txt files. I also have a file called BNC word list. That's the file I'm going to use as my reference corpus. I won't explain what a reference corpus is right now, but I'll come back to it later. The concordancer program I'm going to use is called AntConc. It's easy to find on any search engine. At the AntConc homepage, there's a free download for all different types of computers. And if you scroll down the page, there are also word frequency lists available for download. This is where I got my reference corpus file from. First, I'm going to open up AntConc and load my corpus file. Here is the text file on my desktop. I'm going to select it and click Open. I want to create a keyword list. Along the top of the window there are several options. The one on the far right says Keyword List. But if I click Start, I get an error message saying that there is no reference corpus word list available. At this point, it's probably worth explaining what a reference corpus actually is. A reference corpus is a corpus which is assumed to be representative of language in its normal use. So it's a good benchmark against which we can compare the language used in a particular text, such as a short story. In this case, I'm using the British National Corpus word list as my reference corpus. I've already downloaded the word list and it's sitting on my desktop. So now I'm going to go into AntConc. I'm going to choose Settings, Tool Preferences, select Keyword List on the left, and I'm going to leave all of these settings as the default settings for now. I'm going to select Use a word list for the reference corpus and click Add Files. Here's my word list. I need to click Load and then Apply. Now it's ready to go. If I click Start, the concordancer produces a keyword list. Okay, let's take a closer look at the top keywords. The keywords have been sorted and ranked with regard to their so-called keyness, which is a statistical measure. I'm not going to go into the details of what keyness actually means at this point though. We can see that the top keyword is cartographers, followed by father. And then we have some grammatical words, my and I. I'm not particularly interested in grammatical words for this analysis because they don't tell me a whole lot about the story. Instead, I'm going to focus on content words such as cartographers and father. Considering these top keywords, I'm already getting a sense of authority being quite important in the narrative. You might be thinking that you don't need a concordancer to tell you that. But look what happens if we pull out every sentence from the story containing the top keyword cartographers and keep them in the correct sequence. What we get is a surprisingly coherent summary of the narrative. Michael Toulon demonstrated this in his book about narrative progression in the short story, using James Joyce's 2 Gallants as an example. Toulon refers to this as top keyword abridgment, and although it's an interesting idea, I would like now to turn my attention to the top keyword itself, cartographers, and look at the kind of company that it tends to keep. To do this, I'm going to run a Collocate search on the text. A collocate is basically a word which occurs with another particular word. In this case, I'm interested in the keyword cartographers, and I want to know what kinds of words frequently show up with cartographers. By looking into this, I might be able to get some clues about the meaning of the text. Going back to AntConc, I'm going to jump to the Collocates tool, which is one of the tabs that runs along the top of the program window. I'm interested in the top keyword cartographers, but in the search bar, I'm going to write cartographer with an asterisk. The asterisk functions as a wildcard, meaning the search is going to pick up both the singular and the plural form of the top keyword. Next, I'm going to adjust the collocation window. The collocation window sorts the searches according to the number of words either side of the target word. The default setting is 5 words to the left and 5 words to the right. I'm going to change that to 3 words on either side. This is because I'm interested in the words appearing in the immediate vicinity of the top keyword. Changing the collocation window will change your results to a degree, but I can say that I have done the same search using a few different collocation windows, and I've got pretty much the same results. Before running the Collocate search, I'm also going to change the statistical measure. Basically, when we search for collocates, we want to be sure that the co-occurrence of 2 words is not merely due to chance. We can establish the significance of this co-occurrence using statistics. Without going into a detailed comparison about the complex differences between these 2 measures, I can say that mutual information favors exclusive collocations, such as okie and dokie. This means it's rare to find one without the other. T-score, on the other hand, favors non-exclusive pairs of words, and that's the kind of search that I want to do on the top keyword cartographers. To change the Collocate settings in AntConc, First, I'm going to select Settings at the top of my screen and choose Tool Preferences. Then I select Collocates in the left-hand column, and at the drop-down menu, I'm going to change it from Mutual Information to T-Score. When I click Start, the concordancer creates a list of collocates that go with the word cartographer. Again, some of the top results are grammatical words, in this case the and of. It's interesting that the word father has again been identified as an important and meaningful word. What's even more interesting for me is that the word father has a strong semantic association with the top keyword cartographer. This particular collocate has a T-score value greater than 2, which, generally speaking, means that it is statistically significant. Other content words that collocate with cartographer, such as needs and report, also appear to be quite important, even though their T-score value is just under 2. But with a value of 1.98, I think the collocates needs and report should be investigated further. At what point do we begin to ignore the results on this list? There's no answer to that. It's up to you as the analyst. And of course, it depends on the context of the search. For me, I'm going to use the top 3 content words in this list to guide my interpretation of the story. Until now, I've talked quite a lot about the technical side of my approach, such as setting up and using a concordancer. But it's all meaningless unless those findings are interpreted. What I've tried to show is that it's quite quick and easy to run a keyword search, and that a keyword search is quite a reliable way to identify significant features of text. I've also tried to show that collocation is an interesting aspect to consider as well. So now that we have the keywords and we have the top collocates, let's take a more detailed look into what those collocations might mean in the context of the story. Since this discussion is going to be limited by time constraints, I'm very mindful of the fact that a lot of my interpretation depends on the viewer having at least some knowledge of the story. If you haven't read this story yet, I highly recommend it. And fortunately, the full text is available online at this link. In any case, I need to proceed with the assumption that my viewers have at least some familiarity with the narrative. Jumping back to AntConc for a moment, you'll see that from the Collocate Search results screen, if I click on a word, it will bring up every instance of that word in the text, along with a little bit of co-text either side of the target word. Let's start with the word father, because it's the top collocate of the top keyword. But if we trust the mathematics, we can assume that there is some semantic significance in the co-occurrence of these two words. The concordance lines here might not give us quite enough context for interpreting the significance of father. But by thinking about these particular instances in the context of the story, we might be able to get at the meaning. In the first concordance line, we have my father, a cartographer himself. So here, very clearly, the father is being associated with the cartographers. And as the sentence continues, we see that the father told the narrator stories about his colleagues, and these stories are about how parts of the land would disappear before the cartographer's eyes. So it's becoming clear that the father has some really valuable knowledge, and this idea is echoed in the third concordance line when the narrator's girlfriend Karen asks the narrator's father whether it will be a good cartographer's report, and the father roars with laughter. Again, it suggests that the father, as a cartographer, knows something really important. The second concordance line is again aligning the father with cartographers in general. The section title is To the Archetypal Cartographer. Immediately after that, we get a description of the narrator's father. So it is suggesting that the narrator's father is like an archetypal cartographer, meaning that the father represents cartographers in the most general sense. In the third and fourth concordance lines, we see the father almost desperately trying to justify the existence of cartographers by emphasizing how the world needs them. There is another section of the story which doesn't show up in this search, which is about the father's theory. I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that the father has a very interesting theory about why things are disappearing. His theory is that anything that is harmful or irrelevant or unloved will disappear from the earth. And so if the father's theory is correct, it proves that the father has some valuable knowledge for society and, as a cartographer, is very important. However, at the end, the father does dematerialize, suggesting that he is irrelevant or unloved, at least at the most local level of reality. And so what is highlighted for me is an inherent contradiction. The father and the cartographer are opposing forces, and yet the cartographer is embodied in the father. And so for me, this evidence suggests that contradiction is a very important part of this story. Allow me to very quickly mention the other top collocates that came up in the search. The next content word in the list was needs. And as we can see from these instances, it's the father reiterating what he sees as the importance of cartographers in society. He himself is a cartographer, and at this point in the narrative, some cartographers have already dematerialized, so he's probably going through a good deal of existential anxiety at this moment. The next content word in the list of ranked collocates is report. In each of these concordance lines, we see that it's the cartographer's report which is being highlighted. Traditionally, the cartographer's report is the very thing that defines reality. At least that's the official truth. And this truth is highlighted in the first and second concordance lines. But perhaps the most important example here is the fourth concordance line, and that's because despite having an excellent cartographer's report, it turned out to be the greatest disaster in living memory. That's when highly valued buildings, such as the ICI building pictured at the beginning of this presentation, begin to disappear. The official version of reality clashes with lived experience. Again, contradiction emerges as a theme, and the common people, just like the narrator's father, start to feel a real sense of anxiety as they try to reconcile these two contradictory realities. So to wrap this up, here's a summary of the findings from the keyword search and the Collocate search. And this leads me to my final interpretation of the story, which is very much a generalization. Realities, or versions of reality, do clash, and sometimes our sense of reality breaks down. Contradiction does exist, and when these things happen, there is a real sense of unavoidable anxiety. For me, the most important meaning in this story is the interconnectedness of contradiction and reality and anxiety. This is a really abstract kind of statement, and that's why fiction is the best medium for conveying such a meaning. Peter Carey does an amazing job of articulating these kinds of complex and abstract messages through his weird and wonderful stories. The message may not always be easy to interpret, but the process can be assisted with the help of digital tools. Well, thank you for watching this until the end. I hope that it has been interesting, and I hope that I have managed to encourage or inspire you to begin experimenting with a concordancer in your own research. Of course, a concordancer is no substitute for thorough literary interpretation, but it can be a really powerful and reliable tool for guiding that reading. And that's what I hope I have demonstrated in this presentation. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions, and thanks again for watching.